Our special guest this evening is Suzanne Kamata. Born and raised in Grand Haven, Michigan, home for her is Tokushima Prefecture with her husband and 2 cats. While there, she has authored numerous books as well as modeled for a textbook cover, done voiceover work for a TV commercial, and planted trees with the emperor. Her short stories, essays, articles, and book reviews have appeared in over 100 publications, including Real Simple, Brain, Child, Cicada, and the Japan Times. Her work has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize 5 times, and she received a special mention in 2006. She is also a 2-time winner of the All Nippon Airways Wingspan Fiction Contest, winner of the Paris Book Festival, and an honor award recipient from the Asian Pacific American Librarians Association. She joins us tonight to discuss her new novel, The Baseball Widow, and shows us how she has created a literary life for herself in rural Japan. So we will begin with a presentation and reading from Suzanne's novel. Then we'll open the floor for questions from those attending in person and virtually. For those online, please use the Q&A function on your screen to submit your questions, and I'll pass them on to the speaker on your behalf. Everyone here in the room, please kindly use this microphone here when speaking to ensure that our virtual guests understand what's being discussed. Thank you. After the Q&A, we'll have a book sale and signing up front here to close out the event. Those attending virtually may also purchase a book to be signed and can pick it up at the library at a later date. If you would like, they are 1,900 yen. Thank you again for being here tonight. Please join me in welcoming Suzanne to our club.
Okay, thank you for coming and braving the various obstacles that you might have considered when coming. I'm very pleased to be here. This is my first time at the Tokyo American Club, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you for coming tonight. So it's been a while since I've talked about a book, but almost every event at which I've introduced a book, people have asked me, how much of your book is autobiographical? So I'm going to preempt that question, and I'm going to tell you a bit about myself without spoiling any of the book for those of you who haven't read it. And maybe you can kind of figure out which parts are based on real life and which are not. So the question, like, how much of your book is real or based on real life is kind of, it makes me kind of uncomfortable, because if I say I made it all up, then it might seem inauthentic. So after my first novel, someone asked me for advice on where to go surfing in Bali, because one of the characters was a surfer. And I had never been surfing before, and I had never been to Bali. But I didn't want to admit that, because then they might think the whole book was, even though it's fiction, people want to believe that it's true. But I will confess that when I'm reading a novel, I sometimes stop and I go to Wikipedia or Google and try to figure out, is this something that really happened in their life? And so I know it's like a natural thing. So I'm going to talk about creating a literary career in rural Japan, and also a little bit about how I came to write The Baseball Widow. So I was born in Michigan, in Grand Haven, which is a little bit to the west of Grand Rapids, so about 30 minutes west on Lake Michigan. So growing up in Michigan, of course, we were big Tigers fans. And I think when I first came to Japan, Cecil Fielder, he played for the Tigers, right? So he was playing baseball in Japan. So I had a little bit of a connection there. And the first professional baseball game I ever saw was at Tiger Stadium in Detroit. And growing up, this should be a picture of me with my mother, because my mother is the one who took me to the library and read to me all the time. But growing up, we always had books, and I started writing from quite a young age. And I remember like drawing pictures, like drawing stories with pictures without words, and deciding, like when I was in like first grade or something, that I wanted to be a writer. And when I was in elementary school, there was a young writers conference at Hope College in Holland, Michigan, and I was chosen as a delegate with my very derivative story. It was like Reddy the 3 o'clock fox, and it was kind of inspired by a book called like Cinnabar the 5 o'clock fox or something. But I did research, in the World Book Encyclopedia to figure out like what foxes ate, and I drew pictures, and it was pretty long too. And I was chosen to go to this writers conference. So that was my first experience at a writers conference. And in the photo to the standing up, I'm the girl with blonde hair, and the boy standing up is my brother. And he had written a story that was kind of also derivative of like Watership Down. and he was also chosen to go, but he wasn't really into writing as much as I was. When I was in high school, I was a National Merit finalist. I don't know if they still do that in America, if they still have they do. Okay, so I was a National Merit finalist, and every child of at my father's company, everyone, if your child was a National Merit finalist, they would get a scholarship. So I got a scholarship from my father's company, and I was interviewed by the local newspaper. And I told them, that I aspired to, I think I said that I aspired to be an editor of Vogue. And I was very interested in working for fashion magazines, actually. I wanted to go to New York City and write for fashion magazines. And I wrote to fashion magazine editors, and I said, how can I write for Mademoiselle or Vogue? And one person wrote back, you need a rich uncle, because New York City is so expensive and the editor's salary was very low. So I had to think about another way to make money while I was writing my books, right? And I said also that eventually that I wanted to write a book, and it would be some great American masterpiece that kids would have to read in English class. So I was, 16 or 17 and kind of arrogant, but I don't think I've achieved that yet, but sometimes kids have read my books in class. So, and I went to, my family had moved from Michigan to South Carolina my senior year of high school. And so I stayed in South Carolina to go to the University of South Carolina. And this was way after I graduated, but they were national collegiate champions 2 years in a row. So another baseball connection. And in South Carolina, there isn't a professional baseball team, as you probably know. So we cheered for the Atlanta Braves. And one of the first baseball players to go, I think, to go into the major leagues from Japan was Kenshin Kawakami. So he went to high school in Tokushima, and he happened to play for the Braves. So that was kind of exciting. So I came to Japan on the JET program, which I'm sure you all know. And at the time that I came, Japan was, like a tiger, and, Japanese companies like Sony was buying up Hawaii, and many people were interested in Japan because of business. So people come to Japan for different reasons at different times. I was mainly interested in literature. So I think I came to Japan partly because of two books. One, I don't know if I would even like them anymore, but I'll tell you what they were anyway. So one was Equal Distance by Brad Lighthouser, which was set in Kyoto. So it was about a young American man who comes to Kyoto and has some interesting experiences and finally goes back to America, right? And the other one was Ransom by Jay McInerney, which I'm a big fan of his. Like, I don't meet many people who are, but but okay. So I really liked the vibe of that book. You know, it made Japan seem very interesting, and that was also set in Kyoto. And an American guy comes to Japan, has some life-changing experiences, and goes back to America, right? But rarely do they stay. And another reason I was interested in coming to Japan was because of fashion, of course. So like Issey Miyake, and I spent my first jet salary pay envelope of cash at Issey Miyake. Okay. So I was sent to Shikoku, to Tokushima. I think I said on my application that I wanted to go anywhere but Tokyo because I wanted to experience the real Japan. So I'm sure I would have had an excellent time in Tokyo, and maybe I should have said Tokyo or someplace big, and I could have had more career options. But I asked for something rural, and they gave me exactly that. So when I first came here, there was no bridge between Shikoku and Honshu. It was like a 3-hour ferry ride. And if the waves were bad, there was no ferry. so it was, it was rural, kind of the back of beyond. And has anyone here ever been to Shikoku? Okay. So for a lot of people, like I've heard, Shikoku is exotic and the wild, but so I was sent to Tokushima, which is known for the Whirlpools of Naruto, and Awa Odori, the famous dance festival, and Indigo Dyeing. And so hence the local baseball team is called the Indigo Socks. It's a semi-professional team, right? Or like a triple A or something, like really like amateur, well, kind of between amateur and pro, right? But and I was assigned to Naruto High School. And when I arrived, Naruto High School, it was during Koshien. So everybody was watching baseball on TV, and the cab drivers were listening to baseball on TV, on the radio. And in my journal, I wrote, wow, these people really love baseball. And the team from Naruto High School had gone to Koshien. So I was like, wow, they're really, excited about that. And this is Coach Moriwaki. So he was the baseball coach when I first arrived in Japan, and he's again the baseball coach at Naruto. And his team goes it seems like almost every year they go to Koshien. So I understood pretty quickly that Koshien was a really big deal. And you've probably seen the opening ceremony. It's very majestic. And I worked for 2 years as an ALT, and I went all over Tokushima. There were only 12 of us at the time, and in my spare time, I dug sweet potatoes and things like that. I did get to, as Drew said in my introduction, I did get to participate in the kind of Arbor Day ceremony where the emperor comes and you plant trees. So that was kind of exciting. And I already knew that I wanted to be a writer. So I had to figure out, I was ready to get started. Like when I was a university student, I had no time to really write and focus on that. But I found a desk in the garbage, the Sodai Gomi, and I carried it up 5 flights of stairs and the chair. And that's where I started to write. It was kind of my second novel. It was a romance novel that was never published, but okay. And I also thought, wow, like here in Shikoku, there aren't any like English language literary magazines, so maybe I should start one. So there were a few in Tokyo and maybe like Nagoya, but for some reason I thought, Tokushima needed an English language literary magazine. So I put out a call for manuscripts and people sent them to me. And I published 16 editions of my literary magazine, Yomimono. And then I got married, and my husband was an aspiring high school baseball coach. At the time, he was a weightlifting coach. And actually, when I first met him, the day that I met him was the day that Hurricane Hugo destroyed South Carolina's coast. And I met him at a party. A fellow English teacher's parents came to Japan. And so he had a party to introduce his parents to his life in Tokushima. And my husband offered to drive me and some other people home, and he had a borrowed car because he was working at the night school in Tokushima, and a student had broken his windshield with a baseball bat. So it was kind of a rough assignment. And after I had done a few issues of Yomimono, I had a sense that there were a lot of stories that were publishable and deserved a wider audience. So I put together an anthology of stories by foreigners living in Japan. So that was my first book, The Broken Bridge. And my husband became a baseball coach. So when I first married him, I thought he was the perfect husband for me because I like to spend a lot of time alone writing and reading, and he was always busy, so that was perfect. But after he became a baseball coach at a brand new school in Tokushima, and he was very busy. So the first year, he only had first-year students, and so he had a really hard time just keeping like 9 players on his tally because they lost every game and they weren't very good at baseball. It was an academic school. They didn't have lights, so they couldn't practice at night. And he was spending like hours a day talking them into not quitting. But then I guess he was a good coach because by the 4th year, his team made it to the final. And he had the best pitcher in Tokushima. And we were getting like Nengajo from the Dodgers scout. And so it was kind of exciting, right? And then I had twins, and they were born prematurely. So I had to stop working. I was working as an English teacher, but because they were born so early, they couldn't, it was kind of like the pandemic, right? If they went out if we went to the mall for 5 minutes, they might catch a cold, and then the next day they might be like in the ICU with like bronchitis. So I was stuck pretty much at home or at the school for the deaf. I spent a lot of time there, and like the mothers were required to attend school with their kids. Partly, I think, to bond with each other, and partly to learn sign language and how to raise a deaf child. So my daughter was deaf because she was born so early. I didn't mention that, did I? So I decided that while I was not working full time, I was gonna, put a great deal of effort into publishing my first novel. So I would sometimes like escape from the school for the deaf and go to a coffee shop and write. And ultimately, I finished my first novel, Losing K. And the publisher of this novel was Ira, a writer, Ira Wood, who was married to Marge Piercy, who was kind of a famous writer in the 1970s. She was a kind of a famous feminist writer. And Ira was also really interested in baseball. So he and his wife had written a novel together, and one of the characters was a minor league baseball player. And half of our conversations were about Losing K, and half were about Daisuke Matsuzaka, because he had just been signed by the Boston Red Sox for a lot of money. And my publisher was just outside of Boston. So he was always like, do you think it's going to be okay? Like, are they going to make it to the World Series? And then he said, why don't you write a novel about Japanese baseball with your husband? So my husband doesn't even like writing the little messages on New Year's cards, right? So I knew there was no way he would ever write a novel with me, but he was a font of information, and I was surrounded by baseball, and I was intrigued by all of the little details, right? Like how he would, sit there working on his batting order, or how the mothers would bring tea to the third base umpires and things like that. So I started to write a book, as he suggested, getting lots of advice from my husband. And then I sent it to it took like 2 or 3 years. And I sent it to my literary agent, and she said, are you going to revise this? So I didn't know what to do, so I just set it aside. And in the meantime, I edited 2 collections, one on raising children with special needs, and another was raising children with different cultures. And I wrote a picture book, which was published in Spain, where they don't play baseball. Okay. And Gadget Girl, I wrote a young adult novel, two young adult novels in the meantime. And then a friend of mine suggested that I write a young adult novel about a Japanese about like Koshien and Japanese baseball. So there was a character already in The Baseball Widow who was a high school baseball player. So I took him, but I was having a hard time developing him, for one thing. But I took him out of the book, and I just wrote like a whole novel based on him. And then I revised it. Part of it was published in a magazine. And then I just revised it many, many times until it was a middle grade novel, totally different from what I had imagined. And I still had all this other material from different versions that I really liked. So like I liked the part where they went to the Rabbit Island. I wanted to keep that in. And there was a character, a girl character, Nana in the book, who wanted to go to the Takarazuka review. And I really liked that character, but I couldn't have her in a middle grade novel. So I put her back in. I put that back into the Baseball Widow. And finally, I dug it out and I revised it again. I finally had an idea of how to write it. So I took a chance and I sent it to my publisher, and she decided to publish it. So I guess I can read a little bit. Okay. All right. I think I went over my. All right. So there are 4 points of view in this book. One is Hideki, the coach. One is Christine, his wife. One is Daisuke, the high school baseball player. And there's a little bit from Daisuke's mother. So this scene is from Christine, the baseball widow. Okay. Christine loved Trina's oak table. She loved this kitchen with its American-sized refrigerator decorated with animal magnets and children's art. Its scent of baked bread and the cross-stitch samplers on the wall. She loved Trina's dishes, painted with blue Chinese landscapes, like the ones that she had eaten from at her grandmother's house when she was a child. She remembered that once her oyster casserole or Thanksgiving sweet potatoes were cleared away, she'd wondered about the pagoda on her plate, wondered what it would be like to visit such a place. And then finally she had. She'd been to China, Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, and of course Japan, where she now lived. Ironically, although Christine had fled America in search of the exotic and adventurous, Trina's blue willow patterned dishes, this room itself, now filled her with yearning for all that she had left behind. How was the send-off? Elizabeth asked from across the table, snapping Christine out of her daydream. Elizabeth looked great as usual. Even though she'd given birth just a little over a month ago, she managed to keep her bottle blonde hair touched up and her poplin blouses ironed and unstained. Right now, the baby slept nestled in her arms. Christine smiled. It was fine. Nobody cried, not even me. She thought that sending her son off on his first day of elementary school, on foot no less, since the children were required to walk to school in groups, would have been more wrenching, but what she'd felt was mostly relief. For the first 4 years of her life, her daughter Emma had been in and out of hospitals, and then there was that one terrifying week when both kids were in the ICU at the same time with pneumonia. But now they were healthy and sturdy and ready to be out in the world. Plus, it was nice to finally have some time for herself. Trina gently tapped a spoon against her Support Our Troops mug. I hereby call this meeting of the American Wives Club to order, she said. Christine raised her coffee cup to Trina in a toast. The American Wives Club, AWC for short, wasn't an official organization. There was no club secretary, no president. They got enough of protocol with the Japanese PTA and the Kodomo Kai and other Japanese mothers groups. In reality, the AWC was composed of the three of them, Christine, Elizabeth, and Trina, wife of a Japanese professor whose 2 chestnut-haired children, not yet school-aged, were now under the table, clawing at knees. Elizabeth's eldest child, a daughter, was in the 2nd grade at a private academy with an English immersion program. Although coffee was enough of an excuse for a gathering, on this morning, they'd gotten together to give Elizabeth a baby shower. According to Miss Manners, a baby shower was supposed to be held in the 8th month of pregnancy. But etiquette be damned. The members of the AWC put enough time and energy into keeping track of and adhering to Japanese customs, exactly how much to spend on a summer gift for one's boss, where to stand in an elevator, which days were inauspicious for hospital visits, etc. Sometimes a little anarchy was just the right thing. The belated celebration was also out of deference to Christine, whose daughter had been born 14 weeks ahead of schedule, during Christine's 7th month of pregnancy. For days, weeks, months, Emma had struggled in an incubator at the university hospital, and they had all learned not to take a baby's easy delivery and good health for granted. The doorbell rang then, and Trina jumped up. "Oh, I forgot to tell you. I met a woman at the library the other day. I thought she might like to join us. She's Canadian, but I think we can make an exception. We can be the North American wives." "Yes, of course," Elizabeth said. "The more the merrier." Trina went to open the door, and the others moved their chairs to make room for another guest. Their heads turned when a slender, pale woman with strawberry blonde hair stepped into the room. She held a little boy of about 3 by the hand. Christine could tell by his eyes and brownish hair that he was biracial, hafu, as the Japanese said, just as all of their children were. "Hi, I'm Sophia Lang," she said. She extended her hand to Christine and then to Elizabeth. "Sophia has just signed on as an adjunct at Tokushima University," Trina said. "Her husband is a scientist at Otsuka." Christine nodded. They were all familiar with the pharmaceutical company, one of the area's largest employers, and maker of that ubiquitous, ridiculously named sports drink, Pocari Sweat. Elizabeth's husband worked there too. "They just moved here from, where was it?" "Maryland," Sophia said. "My husband is originally from Tokushima. We thought it'd be nice for Kai here to get to know his father's family better, and also work on his Japanese language skills. My husband asked for a transfer, and here we are." She had that fresh off the plane look about her. Christine had read somewhere about the stages of culture shock. She'd experienced them herself. First was the euphoric falling in love stage when everything was new and exciting. Pretty soon the shine would wear off and irritation would set in. She'd get sick of having little kids point at her hair and of people asking if she could use chopsticks. She'd discovered that the bank machines closed early and that if she didn't have her laundry out by 8 in the morning, so late, the neighbors would chat about her. "Have a seat," Trina said, ushering Sophia into a chair. "And Kai, maybe you'd like to go play with Nana and Kenta. Kids, out from under the table. Show this nice little boy your toys." Trina's 2- and 3-year-olds emerged, giggling, and ran out of the room. Kai looked up at his mother for confirmation before scrambling after them. "Ah, peace at last," Trina said, pouring coffee for Sophia into a University of Virginia mug. They went around the table and introduced themselves. "I'm Elizabeth Tanigawa from Kentucky. I'm doing some research about expatriates in Tokushima," she drawled. "I'm planning on writing a book or an essay or something." She was always immersed in some project. For a while, it had been indigo dyeing, and before that, pottery, and even longer ago, she'd been obsessed with local folklore. During the latter phase, she'd compiled dozens of stories about trickster raccoon dogs, but she'd never tried to publish them. It was just something to keep her busy. "Well, that sounds interesting," Sophia said politely. "I didn't know there were enough expats here for a book." It's true that there were hardly any foreigners in Tokushima Prefecture. Christine had gone days without seeing another non-Japanese in the capital city, weeks even. Although bridges now linked the island of Shikoku via sparsely populated Awaji Island with Honshu, there were no high-speed bullet trains zipping across the island. There were few jobs for foreign women outside of teaching English or pouring drinks in hostess bars, and tourists from abroad rarely added the island to their agenda. Maybe I should stop there so you can ask questions. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Sorry.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to pose?
Yeah, you have to.
If possible, yes.
Oh, come on.
I can maybe bring it to you.
I could keep reading, but yeah, I'm going to give you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just wondering, what is the process for you being in Japan to write in English? Is it difficult? I mean, you're surrounded by Japanese all day, and is it kind of hard to get out of that to come down and write in English? I mean, is there something you do to kind of?
Well, I teach English, and I usually try to teach entirely in English, and I read a lot in English. So it's not that difficult for me. I think the fact that I read a lot helps keep the language in my brain.
I'll follow up with one more question. So then, now that you've written the book, is it hard to find a publisher being in Japan? Are you disconnected from the literary world for English publishing, or?
I think it would be easier if I were in the United States, but these days, a lot of publicity is done by social media. So it's not as much of a barrier as it was before. But I think publishers like for people to go out in public and sell the book. So, like to book festivals and for schools and things like that. So it can maybe, that's a barrier.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks. I've got a question from online here.
Okay.
They wrote, I'm sure it's cathartic to finish a book, but did it feel different with The Baseball Widow?
Yes, because this book is very autobiographical, and my husband knew about this book. I've been working on it for since 2008. And it was kind of a joke. So if I wrote a column for All Nippon Airways in-flight magazine, and I would, use little anecdotes from our family's life. And my husband would sort of half jokingly object to my using our family for my writing. And I'd be like, well, at least I haven't published The Baseball Widow. But then when I did, I was like, he's like, what's that? I said, oh, it's The Baseball Widow. And he was kind of okay with it, but I was a bit nervous. Yeah.
I've got one just for myself, but yeah, please, Ms.
Okay.
Slater. No, thank you.
Thank you very much
Thank
for the
you.
wonderful talk. And can you tell us a little about your creative process? So how do you, when you got the idea for the book, and do you outline, or do you just write it through, or do you write some and put it away, or how was writing this book for you?
I never write in order. I never write scenes in order. So normally whatever occurs to me, and so it's very organic. I never outline. So I had a kind of a vague idea of where I wanted to start and where I wanted to finish. I usually kind of know what the ending is going to be, but yeah, I tend to put everything that I'm interested in at the moment into whatever book I'm writing too. So it's kind of messy and organic.
And do you do a lot of revision, or are you one of the writers who just write through, and that's kind of?
This book was revised heavily. A lot of parts were cut. Originally it took place over 10 years. And then it was just my agent said, it's like a diary. So I had to find a way to make it more fast paced and to compress. And I had to make it, originally it was more autobiographical. So I think once I got away from that, I was easier to to change it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
There are a lot of baseball books in the world.
Yeah.
And also a lot of baseball books about Japan. Do you have any that you have read that you enjoyed or that informed either the content or the shape or the process of this book?
I probably most significantly, I read Robert Whiting's books. I think 2 or 3 books. The what was it? The Bat and the Chrysanthemum, and The Meaning of Ichiro. And I watched that documentary Kokoyaku. Have you seen it?
I have.
Yeah, and those were the 2 main ones. And I spent a lot of time watching, high school baseball at Koshien and my husband's team and things like that. So reading articles, coverage of games in the Japan Times.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
I've got one more question.
Okay, go
Me
ahead.
being from Michigan
Mhm.
and you being from Michigan, it's interesting that you had a book, Mermaids in Michigan, and then also that you've written a lot about Tokushima as well. Both of these places aren't really known for having a lot of fiction or novels being placed there. Do you feel like writing about place is really crucial to what's attractive to you in your writing? And if so, are you working on other books in the future that are complete opposite of that? Or is that something that you're really exploring as that particular local place?
I think I'm like often attracted to places, and I kind of, that's one of the first things that comes, like, I want to write a book set in Paris, or and with my books which are set in Tokushima, I thought nobody's really written about Tokushima in English. Most books tended to be set in Tokyo or Kyoto, and it's kind of my turf, I thought. I mean, there are books written in Japanese that could be translated, but I thought I would just, own it. And Grand Haven as well. It's a relatively small town, but it has its, certain charms. So I wanted to write about that. I think I was feeling a bit nostalgic too. So yeah.
Was it different writing that here in Japan?
I think I need a little bit of time. I wrote the Mermaids of Lake Michigan about, that was the first book I wrote, actually. So I'd been living in Japan for less than 10 years, so I wasn't ready to write about Japan. And so I needed a little bit of distance, but I wasn't ready to write about Japan. Now it's hard for me to write about other countries, about the United States. But I'm trying to write a book set in South Carolina right now. Maybe because, like, during the pandemic, I was kind of worried about my family there. So
it's interesting. Well, thank you for writing. Thank you for being here tonight. And thanks everyone for coming out. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.